We're on.
All right, we are on. Good evening, everybody. I should take off my glasses so I can see. Welcome to Coffee with Doc 2022. Christy Van Hoven here, the director of the National EMS Museum, and I am delighted to say that NAEMT has brought us the whole 2022 lineup with a special sponsorship. So that's a tongue twister. Thank you very much, NAEMT, for your support this year. This is going to be fantastic. Tonight I have Doc, of course, with me, along with Dr. Walt Stoy, who many of you know or have worked with or have trained under. So I'm going to kick it right off to you guys. I think it'll be a great night.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Howdy again, Walt. Good to see you, man.
Good to see you, Richard. You're looking great.
Walt and I go back a long way from opposite ends of the state of Pennsylvania. I was in the East, he was in the West. We were just trading some war stories, which we won't get into tonight. But I want to start it off, Walt, by saying, how did you get your start at EMS? I think that's interesting.
Well, thanks, Richard. And thanks for having me. It's great to be here to be the kickoff for the 2022 event. So my start in EMS is like many others in some regards. It was while I was still in junior high and high school. I thought I wanted to do things in medicine. I worked at the pool. I was a lifeguard, and at a very early age, I lied about my age and achieved my water safety instructor a couple of years prior to what I was supposed to have. And then actually became the manager of the pool. And during that time, trained in first aid and such. And that felt that, hearing about the stuff that was going on at that time, EMT, as I was finishing up, I went and trained as an EMT and worked at a funeral home based EMS service in my home community. That, like the running joke is that, you have the person in the back, which is was a caddy high boy. For those of us that have been around, remember a caddy high boy, great ride, not a lot of headroom to work inside, but What a wonderful ride. And that when you got to that intersection, the person driving would look back and go like, how's the patient? And if they had already met their demise, you went to the funeral home. And if they hadn't, you continued on to the hospital. And then from there, I went to Pittsburgh, where I joined yet another funeral home based EMS service called Zeffels, and worked for them for a year while I was still doing my paramedic training. And in '77, got hired as a paramedic for the city of Pittsburgh and worked as a paramedic from them, '77 to '81. And then Ron Stewart, who had come to Pittsburgh, brought me on board to the center. I've been there now coming up this will be my 41st year. And in the middle of that, flew as a flight medic for 12 years. And for the last 20 years, my greatest joy actually has been where I am these days at ski patrol and taking care of patients. Love trauma. I get 3 months of taking care of trauma patients, and the snow melts. And then I get
skiing.
Yeah, plus 9 months off. But I'm still a card carrying paramedic. And for the last several years during the summer, a friend of mine at Tri-Community South EMS here in southwestern Pennsylvania, the former director who just retired in the end of the year, I would ride there in the summer. And so it was good. Love being out there still with patients and doing teaching and such.
Very cool. Now, when did you get involved with NDMS and Pennsylvania 1 DMAT? What year was that? Do you remember?
Oh, I should have looked that up for you. So it was early on. I was part of the group that when it was formed. I have my original ID is in my office in the cabinet there on a showcase. I want to say it was somewhere back in the 80s. It was back when it was just Department of Health and Human Services.
Yeah.
And before it was even really DMAT.
Yeah.
So I was part of that group, and then but Pennsylvania DMAT 1 with them up until the time where I started being on major projects in the Middle East, where I was commuting back and forth there. And at that point, then it was time to give a few things up, and PA DMAT was one.
Sure. Yeah, I think NDMS was formally involved, launched in '88 is when I think it was came into being in its current form.
Sounds right. Yeah, I'm sure you would know better than me. I mean, you're still the active person there.
Yeah. I have no idea what I'm going to do when I grow up, Walt. I mean, it's just.
That's what we all say, don't we? We're always ghosts. Like, so I've got students that are all like about 20 to 22 years old because they predominantly do all the seniors still. And,
Yeah.
you know, I always ask them what they want to be when they grow up. And they always go, well, what did you want to be when you grew up? I go, I haven't grown up yet, so I still don't know what I want to be.
There you go. There you go. So what are you doing now with the university? What kind of courses are you involved with?
Oh, well,
You're
over the
still involved
years,
with the center, right?
I'm still at the center. I'm professor, my director emeritus at the center. So I've stepped down from everything administratively back in 18. And so it's been great. All I'm really doing these days is teaching, and I love being with the students. Don't do much with the juniors, although I go in and teach the patient assessment section for both the center side and the Pitt
Cool.
side. I predominantly do senior year classes. So, and within the School of Health Rehab Sciences, which is a school I've been in since we created the degree program back in '98, because my original appointment at Pitt was in the School of Medicine, which I still maintain my secondary appointment in School of Medicine in the Department of Emergency Medicine.
At Jefferson.
At no, at the University of Pittsburgh, at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. So at Pitt, my original appointment, when Ron Stewart hired me, I was interestingly enough, I was what was called a research associate, and I was in the was the Department of Anesthesia, Critical Care Medicine.
Gotcha.
That's a real low rung, because in the educational domain, you're either an instructor, assistant professor, associate professor, or professor. And I've been a professor now for many years. So I've promoted up, you know, over the many decades, as I should have, appropriately through the sections. And that I teach ethics to rehab science students. In the fall, I teach 2 classes with Paul Paris. For those who know Paul, he created a class, Cognitive Psychology, Clinical Decision Making, and it's a great class. Every Wednesday from 9 to 11, we only take 12 students, although we took 13 for this fall class to see how we can do, bumping it up a little bit. But there's always something to be said about teaching just, you know, a handful of students versus we take 48 students in the degree program every year. But to really have them engaged and have them think about thinking and think about what they do with cognitive biases and, you know, like anchoring and framing and other things in medical situations. And so it's one of the best courses that seniors really like to have. I also teach a professional issues class in the fall term. I do an organizational theory class this term, a senior seminar. It starts in the fall, but I always have all the students take the entire year to do it. Many of them, it's their internship, and they have to do something that's education, clinical, or administrative, and a minimum of 40 hours. Many will do many more hours. If they're headed on to medical school, they'll find more stuff with our DEM research folks and get their name on a publication. Many of the students actually will become first authors and even present at national conferences during their senior year as an undergraduate student at Pitt.
Very cool. Very cool. Something you and I chatted about before we went live is what's happening to the folks that you and I have taught over the years once they get into EMS, and why don't they stay? Let's put it that way.
Oh, great question. So I remember the very first class I did under the Center for Emergency Medicine was back in '82. It had 20 students in it. And I still keep in touch with probably about 5 of those 20. One that comes to mind, and I hope none of these people will be embarrassed but that I bring up their name and such. So Myron Rickens, who had already trained as a medic but came back to train with us because he realized that, you know, he felt shortchanged with what he'd got with where he had done his paramedic education initially. And so he went through the program with us in that first class, and that he is, you know, like an upper end administrator of pre-hospital care for the entire UPMC healthcare system. So when you talk about some of these individuals, they are still in the profession and they've climbed the ladder and they've done many amazing things. Over the years, a large number of our students, particularly of Pitt students, go on to PA. I would say we're a stepping stone program. I have no problem using that language. I know some people don't like it. I know when the students are out, unfortunately, writing with the various EMS services that we utilize for their field rotations, that there are some out there that don't like the idea that here comes Richard, and Richard's just, using us because he's going to go on to PA or medical school or nursing as an advanced degree. But interestingly enough, as an example of that, our associate medical director, Muhammad Ahmed, trained with us years ago and graduated from our undergraduate degree. He went to school out on your side of the state and did medical school out there, came back, did our residency. He's our associate medical director.
Very
And it's
cool.
just, it's such a treat to have him. And there's so many others that I sit in what I historically since 81 call grand rounds. Now we call it EMEC, the Emergency Medicine Education Conference, every Thursday from 8 to 12. And when I sat there just yesterday, Thursday, every Thursday from 8 to 12, I go there live. And right beside me is one of our graduates who's a third-year resident. And over from him is a first-year resident who also graduated from our undergraduate degree in emergency medicine. And they will train in emergency medicine. They'll be ED physicians. They'll do fellowships. They'll do their EMS subboards, and they'll be medical directors. And
Yeah.
so that's why you can't be upset with the folks who go on who are positioned to come back and achieve greater abilities for what we need to have happen. But as you and I were talking about before we got underway, you, myself, and many others are worried about what we call the 4 R's: recruitment, retention, recognition, and reimbursement. It's a significant factor on what goes on in our profession.
Yeah, it's very problematic. And I guess what concerns me and probably concerns you as well, we find bright kids, and I call them all, of course, they're all kids to me
Yeah,
now,
for
but
us.
we find bright kids, we teach them how to do what it is we do, and you turn around 2 or 3 years later and they're gone. They've gone off to nursing school, they've gone off to PA school, they've gone off to do something else. And now at my age, I turn around and most of them have retired already, most of my former students. So, but how do we, in your mind, how do we keep them involved in EMS? I mean, that's what we brought them in for and tried to rear them. How do we keep them?
Great question. Richard, I'm sure it's true for you. And I know we didn't talk about this, but it's like anything else in healthcare, as we say, and we know it's a calling. And for us, our calling is to do medicine in extraordinary places.
Yep.
And to do it under conditions that few others would want to be able to do. There's the average healthcare provider, when you tell them you're going to have to take care of a patient in the ditch in the dark at 3 o'clock in the morning, hanging upside down, they go like, yeah, no, that's not going to happen. But for me and for you and thousands of others who really like that kind of environment, that's why we've done it. That's why we continue to do it. That's what we like to do. I mean, as I mentioned, I'm up here at my place to do ski patrol the next 3 days. And when I was up here last week, just, it was the one shift on Saturday, 4 patients, possible fractured wrist, possible knee injury, a definite fractured clavicle, which I had all my candidates that I was with be able to feel that. And the one inadvertently was a little too aggressive. The gentleman who was being very nice about letting me have students all take a feel at this drop off wasn't necessarily happy with that. And then the interesting case of the day was a guy who just went unconscious in the chair, was with his friend. And by the time they got off, he was coming around and then brought down in the toboggan. And he was, powers all get out, white as a sheet. I mean, we got him inside. Again, a great teaching tool for the students I'm with. And the nice thing for the outcome is he did well and we discharged him. And but a lot of interesting cases here as well. And it's just a matter of finding the people who like to be around those kind of events. Again, my belief is what we've got to do is we've got to find ways to find finances and get money. And that the one thing I do all the time, Richard, with my students is that I, particularly the seniors, once, I've got to know them and they've got to know me, at some point in the class, I ask them, I go, if we were to pay you $100,000 a year to be a paramedic instead of the $100,000 you're going to get to be a PA, would you stay as a medic? And they would. They love being a medic, but they don't make 100,000.
No, no.
And so they're going to go become a PA.
Yep.
And because, if you've been at Pitt, particularly, you've got a lot of debt you're leaving with.
Yeah, and what's interesting is, as we were talking about earlier, what I've been doing with NDMS recently, we are learning that the hospitals are suffering a great exodus of nurses who are leaving the hospitals that they're at and
Right.
becoming travel nurses because they can make a whole lot more money,
Correct.
and work when they want and not work when they don't want.
Yeah.
So I think we've got some things that are confronting us in EMS, and I think you might agree that in most places, I think we've pretty well gotten our arms around the education process, with some exceptions. But we haven't gotten our arms around the retention capability of, and aside from money, what do you think it is, other than money, what do you think it is we have to do, keep people in the profession?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, over the decades, I know there's been individuals, organizations and such that have tried to evaluate that. I've even, worked with students on projects as part of their internships where we developed appropriate questions to be able to utilize, but never executed it. Things changed up and I put it on a shelf, but I've offered up the question for others. So if anybody out there wants them, I'd be happy to share them to address what is often talked about as why people leave. It's the leadership and management issues within an EMS service, that they're not happy with, how things are running. And that we've, in the early years, go back to the 60s and 70s to our modern version of EMS, majority of those services, funeral home based, you probably can't find too many at all, funeral home based EMS services now. Being you were on the eastern part of the state, there was a report in the 70s in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, 86% of the EMS services were volunteer
Absolutely.
staff.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I can get my hands on any good data now to give me a better idea of what it is, but I would say it's greater than 90% are predominantly paid. You can find very few volunteer EMS services. And that if I think when you had the volunteers, again, it was the calling. It was, they really wanted to be part of that, community, whether it's just a third service EMS or whether it was a fire-based EMS service, however it was created for them to work in. And that I think there's still a lot of folks that probably leave the profession because they just don't necessarily agree with the management style or what's going on within the organization. And if you talk to anybody in healthcare, and I was just doing this yesterday with the residents, and all of the residents and some of the attendings that were there, talking about what our lifestyles are like. I love to teach. If every day, if you told me, just like you, Richard, I'm sure, if you just told me I had to go teach for the 2, 3, 4 hour class
Cool.
and not have to worry about all the other stuff, my life would be beautiful.
Yep.
But over the years, it is too much front end, during, and after stuff that has to be done. That's just like CYA, even in education and in healthcare, it is just extraordinary. And I'm sure you can relate to this as well. So in this, when I wrote trip sheets in the 70s, you wrote a few marks on a piece of paper to get the service their money from the insurance or Medicare, Medicaid, and that was it. And now the charting's unbelievable. And it's not only just to get the money, it's the legal part that, predominant part of that, of course, that it's all basically, you've got to make sure that if anything were to happen, you got to cover yourself and the service.
Yeah. Well, and you make a fascinating point. I started doing this stuff when I was 16. And when EMS came around, as you point out, it was all volunteer in Pennsylvania. And then we got ALS services, and those were volunteer for quite some time.
That's right.
I don't think I got my first dollar of pay in EMS until 1983. I was getting paid to teach, but I wasn't getting paid to provide EMS care until 83. I mean, it's fascinating. but I'd love to see us figure out how to better retain the kids that we find that are quality.
I agree. I wish you or I or whoever out there might be able to let us know if there was a magic crystal ball and we would be able to figure out what's the real formula for being able to find, to recruit and retain individuals in the profession. It'd be great. Now, on the Pitt side, I got to tell you, each year of the 48 we take, by the time they're seniors, I always point out there will be about 4 or 6 that are going to be career EMS providers. So we just started classes this Monday at Pitt, and when I taught the Wednesday class with Paul, he and I both were asking what their plans are, and it was interesting. So we've got one that's thinking of going to law school, and wouldn't be our first. We've got another one who said they're thinking they might become a veterinarian. Wouldn't be our first either. We already had one of those many years ago. And at most were PA still, a couple med school wise. They've done their MCATs. They're getting ready. I mean, they're fast tracking through. Couple nursing. But each time out of the 48, there are about 4 to 6 that'll go like, I'm going to be a career EMSer. And there was one that was interesting who originally thought they were going to go medical school. But while they've been with us, we actually need to talk to them, is what we commented about. They go like, I'm not thinking I'm going to medical school anymore. I think I want to be an EMS educator, which is great because, we need succession planning. This is, I'll announce here, it's 2022. And as we got underway, I let Pitt know this is the year I'm retiring. And for many years,
there's a news flash for everybody.
There's your news flash for everybody. For years, every time the 48 are there and I've got them, all the seniors, I've gone like, which one of you is going to replace me? I'm looking for you. And now I'm beyond looking for you because I already need somebody who's got a little more. But I was just very fortunate. I had Ron Stewart and Paul Paris be mentors for me. I've had hundreds, if not thousands of mentors. Richard, you were a mentor for me as well.
Okay, hold on, Walt.
Sure.
We got people who watching this tonight who don't even know who those 2 people are. Why don't you tell us a little bit about each of them?
Oh, sure. So Dr. Ron Stewart's Canadian physician who trained at Dalhousie up in Nova Scotia, came to California, was his first venture in the United States, and was involved with the LA system. And my brother from another mother there, who I'm in touch with all the time, Dr. Baxter Larman, was his.
How is Bax, by the way? I haven't talked to him in ages.
Oh, Baxter's great. He's retired, but he's still busy, and he's still surfing all the time. So he's doing absolutely great. And I get calls from him in the morning when he's headed to go surfing because he knows it's really early for him, and he knows the only person up on the East Coast is me because he knows nobody's up where he is. So he calls me and we talk while he drives to the surf location. So Ron Stewart came to Pittsburgh in 76 actually, but it was in 77 or 78, I should say. Came in 77, and 78 is when he created the Center for Emergency Medicine, November of 78, but he was there prior to that. And he is known to many nationally and internationally as one of the fathers of EMS.
Absolutely.
And when he came to Pittsburgh, the cute thing is they told him, we don't want you to create a helicopter program. We don't want you to create a residency program. All we really want you to do is be the medical director over Pittsburgh EMS and work in the ED and just keep things simple. And for those who know Ron, which many do, of course, he would just smile and go, yes, absolutely. And he is such a charismatic individual that he could just walk in and sell ice to the Eskimos, as they say, so to speak. Stuff you don't need, he's going to make you buy into it.
Now, how about Paul? Tell us a little bit about Paul.
So Paul stumbled across the center when Ron had put the sign outside announcing that it was the Center for Emergency Medicine. He had been down from, he was doing training up in Maine at the time, up in Portland, and stopped in and Ron convinced him that, he should come and be the director of the residency program. And so Paul started in May of 81 and I started in June of 81 at the center. Ron just, was there 10 years, 78 to 88. As we moved into our bigger building, Ron was headed back to Canada, and
Yep.
then Paul was the person that took me under his wing to mentor me along with everything.
Yeah, it's important, I think, that we reflect on who some of these people are, because they're the building blocks of what we know today as EMS.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
And maybe someday somebody will find us stuffed in a museum and say, yeah, I know what he did and when he did it.
Maybe that'd be perfectly fine. But before we go, we need to find some more folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, as I'm starting to wrap up here, we're wrapping up our time. What do you see as the direction we need to take? And I guess for you and I, the most important thing is, what direction do we need to take EMS education?
Oh, great question. Not much time to answer it in, I guess. EMS continues to do what it's going to do. It has to respond to emergencies. No matter what we do, there'll be medical and traumatic events that are going to take place. We also need to continue to look to emerge into what healthcare is becoming and fill those voids. And we've known for years that the idea of community paramedicine has been there and does a job. And there's great models out there that have demonstrated how we should continue to look at what we do. That the other thing is, and we're moving in this direction, but we need to move it faster, and we need to get CMS and insurance companies and others to understand. And I think we need it personally for me, we need to evolve those of us that are the older generation to become more of the community healthcare practitioner.
Yeah.
Something I read the other day, like when I was a kid and you were a kid, doctors made house calls. I remember my local GP at the time came to our house and took care of us. There were 3 kids, my mom and dad, and the GP came to the house, made house calls. And now the interesting thing is the doctors' offices are calling EMS to come and do house calls at their place because they got stuff they can't handle. So we've come full circle. But within the healthcare system, when we did the EMT curriculum, we did it out in a little place called Ekalaka, Montana, to teach the 6 students that were there. And Drew Dawson, for those who remember Drew had us come do the project there in Montana. And what a great proving ground and the idea of having thoughts on how you should evolve system. And when I was there, I kept saying, to him and Jim Upchurch, who's that was the medical director and from Montana, who I've spent a lot of time with, great friend, Jim, that, people like me, that as I, approach retirement age and abilities, I've got a boatload of information and experience under my belt.
Sure.
And that we should we should have at Pitt, and we should still consider doing it. Create programs where we take people that are in their 50s and 60s and thinking of retiring, who've been in a major city and just been exposed to so much in healthcare, and that want to go fish and hunt and be in rural frontier America, and let them go be the country doctor, so to speak, there.
Yeah.
And be able to, do their inoculations, to do their physical exams, whatever it would be. And they don't have to be a PA. I mean, I get a little frustrated at times, and 10 plus years ago, and in my spare time, created the PA program at Pitt. And that everybody wants to just utilize PAs in the pre-hospital care arena. I'm not necessarily opposed to that, but let's not just keep cycling PAs back down. Let's take EMS providers, create yet another healthcare provider. The same way that I sat on the couch as a kid and watched Emergency 50 years ago and said, that's what I want to do. We need another show. We need somebody to get on and create a program that would entice this current population to be yet another to be named type of EMS type provider to do a different type of healthcare. And let that generation spend the next 50 years evolving that.
Yeah, your point about community paramedicine is really well taken. And what's interesting, I had a job for a while as an EMS director in a very wealthy community with a very slow service. This is before anybody came up with a name called community paramedicine.
Right.
My guys were spending most of their time watching TV. So I said, okay, let's go out in the community and find out who every citizen is that's got chronic health problems. And I want you guys to go check on them once a week. And so we did essentially community paramedicine without even
Right.
knowing we were doing it. But there is a great way to utilize young, interested, dedicated EMS professionals.
Right, right. Well, I think we've got to also look outside our box. We always just like to talk about what's going on in the United States. Ron's back in Canada, and Ron has continued, when he was Minister of Health up there,
He certainly
continued to
has.
evolve
He
what
certainly
EMS
has.
providers do. And again, they're well paid. I mean, the interesting thing when I go up there is you've got nurses who go like, I'm quitting my nursing job to become a paramedic or a community paramedic because it's a better life, more autonomy. Same
Yeah.
thing with the Australian models. Brent Williams.
Yes.
So, he just finished up and has a paper out now on paramedicine. I think we need to do a better job in the United States and worldwide, adopting and practicing what we do. As we've talked about for decades, the physicians, they practice medicine and they study medicine, and nurses study nursing and they do nursing practice. In EMS, we're still this kind of just unknown variant version of what goes on, and paramedicine needs to be our program, and we need to evolve it, and we need to do the research in it, we need to publish within it, and we need to continue to create and evolve what we go on with us. And it's not to say we shouldn't have the physician involvement. I mean, we do in fact need that. And I was involved with the process for the EMS subboards, working with Mike Levy, who's up in Alaska, and a host of other folks with that. And that we need to be what we were created to be, as I understood it, when I started this in the 70s. I was told I was a physician surrogate.
Yep.
Not a physician assistant. I'm a physician surrogate. I am the eyes and ears, and I make clinical decisions on what goes on in emergency events for acute medical and trauma events. And there's nothing that should prevent me from also being that same individual who could also do that for everything in healthcare. But I don't mind calling a doc. I want to phone a friend, just like the TV show. I want to get on and talk to Paul Paris or someone and go like, here's my situation. And I still do that here on the ski patrol. None of the other patrollers do it, but I get on my phone, I call our number to talk to a doc, and I'll go, here's what I've got, and I'm looking for some sage advice.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we've got to evolve those kind of things and make those things happen as well. We've got so much to have happen. Richard, here's going to be the issue that you and I are going to be disappointed with. You and I would both really love to come back in 50 years and see what it really looked like, I bet.
Yeah. And imagine what we could do with the homeless population.
Oh,
If we had community paramedicine. By the time they enter into the system now, they're really, really, really sick.
yes.
It'd be amazing if we could find a way to check them out on a regular basis. And
We've had a couple of our students in our EM program. Dave Goss, who works with Jim Withers, who's a physician, if you look these folks up, has done stuff with the homeless here in Pittsburgh for scores of years.
yeah,
and
I think Dave Downey did it in Miami when he was chief too.
Yeah, may well be. I think we've got to do a better job of taking care of the vets that are out there, and the homeless, and just another one of our graduates, Jarrell Gilliam, is the head of the Light of Life Rescue Mission, and I'm so proud of what he's done in taking care of the homeless in Pittsburgh. And he trained with us as well years ago.
Well, since we are approaching our sunset somewhere down the road, what do you look to establish? What do you want your legacy to be, Walt?
Oh, great question. So family and friends, because they're the ones who know you and remember you the best. Thousands of students. I mean, I'm reminded by others weekly, if not daily for some, the impact that I've had the opportunity and the privilege to be part of, with all the curriculum projects and doing stuff nationally and internationally, that I have great joy in knowing that when people are out there doing care, that somehow either with stuff I've done with curriculum or stuff I've done like this has had an impact, just like I'm sure it is for you. I mean, all the different individuals and organizations, there's nothing that's more satisfying than to be able to, sit in the classroom and watch these students who, remembering when we were just teaching them to, like, do some simple stuff and start IVs, that are now in the EMAC grand round type stuff, and they're shouting out the answers faster than anybody else there on fast exams and what's going on with
Yep.
very high end medical events in the emergency medicine domain. So just a proud papa, so to speak, of a nation of and international folks out there that are
Cool.
doing what has been our calling for all these years, that I hope will be their calling for scores of years for them.
Wonderful. Good thought. And to echo what Christy said in the beginning, I want to express my appreciation to NAEMT for their support in this Coffee with Doc program, which we have going. I don't know when the next one is coming up. I'm so buried in hospital assessments right now, I have trouble knowing what day it is. Christy, when do we do this again and with whom? Do you remember?
I do, but before we sign off, I'm going to hold you hostage just a little bit longer. We do have a question. You coming into Pittsburgh just as Freedom House was closing and shifting gears into a city-run service. What was their legacy? What was it like during that transition period?
Oh, that's a great question. You're right. I mean, Freedom House was basically being phased out about 75 as Pittsburgh EMS was being birthed. And again, Pittsburgh EMS was around a couple of years before I joined in. But there was Gene Keys and Irv Davis were two Freedom House providers. They were both my supervisors. And I had the privilege to work with them and sit at the table and hear stories of Freedom House. There were other EMS providers, but by the time I started, they had been EMS providers with Freedom House, and they were brought on board, and they were part of the 10, what at that time called supervisors, now they're called district chiefs. But Irv Davis and Gene Keys were two fine individuals who were able to share with me what the real early years were of EMS, of the birthing of EMS in Pittsburgh back in the 60s.
Do you have any one or two good quick stories to share before we close out the night?
Just that, the things that come to mind, there's so many that Richard and I knew we're talking about as we get started. There was Peter Saffer, Nancy Caroline, Benson. I mean, there was a host of individuals that, no question, Phil, who's still around, and that they just, when they talk about how they were taken into the hospital and taught so much in such a short amount of time, and then being sent to the streets and being able to provide care and get patients that were originally dying before they would arrive to the hospital basically to be pronounced DOA. And that in those early years, they were the influencers in the out of hospital, pre-hospital care component to make a significant difference and basically establish a solid foundation for so many other organizations to build from. So I was talking about, Rich, after that, there was the Freedom House group that was first in Pittsburgh and southwestern Pennsylvania. After that, as I went into Pittsburgh, I was trained by Al Shatner, and the other groups were trained by, the Weigel brothers. And that you were either a Weigel medic or a Shatner medic, and that it was a different time for sure. And how we did the care and how we evaluated, and it's just like Richard and I were talking about. It has been just a treat, I'm sure, for not only the two of us, but everybody else who's out there and listening to this and will listen to it in the future, to think back about all the things that we've done and how far we've come. But I'm a hopeless romantic, as I hope somebody else is out there, that I basically yearn for, doing things the way we did it in the 70s. Right, Rich?
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Cool. Cool.
Cool.
Amazing.
Wonderful.
Well,
Thank
thank
you,
you
Ken.
for
Well-
joining us. We are back in 2 weeks, February 4th, same time, same place with Eric Gall, who is out of Washington, D.C. So we'll hear some about response in the capital city, which will be exciting. And then we have one scheduled for March, and we're working on the spring and summer schedule as we speak. If you have any suggestions, feel free to drop a line to the museum. We always love having more guests on. And with that, I am going to go heat up some more coffee because it is minus temperatures where I'm at, and I am shivering. Both Walt and I are bracing for a snowstorm, so it'll be great to see the white fluffy stuff. Thank you again, NAEMT. Thank you all for joining us this evening. Dr. Stoy, thank you. Doc, as always, thank you. Have a great weekend. We'll catch
My
up with you
pleasure, everybody.
later.
Take care. Bye-bye.